what I'm curious about is not just creating more diversity on boards, but once you're bringing underrepresented people onto boards, how do you create an inclusive environment so that people of color, women, don't feel like they are the only ones that have to speak up on these issues?
It's such a tough area because feeling included is a personal point of view and perspective. Very, very hard to quantify, very hard even to get qualitative sense of what is it, what's that tone or culture of the board where everyone feels they can bring themselves. We did a lot of work, as you know, Catalyst and the Calvert Group, all about getting a woman on a board, and we realized that having one woman on a board was not going to get it. I would argue that we probably will see the same thing with women of color and people of color, that one is never a comfortable place. 2 to 3 starts to get to a place of a sense of that you're not thinking about representation, you're now focused on the inclusive part.
Yes.
But to inclusion specifically, you know, what I have found is that an inclusive board starts with inclusive committees, and it starts with a board chair. The board chair can set a tone for an inclusive environment. And a lot of times when you're the most senior person in the room, meaning the board chair, you've got to kind of bring down and flatten that board. And the ways I've seen that happen so successfully, I love on PNC, my board chair, Andrew, one of the things he does one-on-ones with all of us. And I know that sounds like a very standard, but I remember his one-on-ones are so open to and so self-deprecating initially, where he says, here are all the things I learned and I feel overwhelmed by this. He just gives you permission in the room to come in as yourself and to say the things that might be uncomfortable in a full board. Because I remember when I joined that board, I was still at Microsoft, and they were my client as well. And I'm on the tech committee. So oftentimes I didn't want to share things because I didn't want to be perceived as salesmen. So I got a chance to say that to Andrew in my one-on-one. And he showed such amazing allyship with me so that he would bring the topic forward, that sort of almost, my ghostwriter, he would bring it forward, and it wouldn't be me initiating, and then we would get into a serious, robust discussion. So I think allyship and one-on-ones from a board chair are huge to learn what inclusion feels like to people, not assume it. I think part of it is that one-on-one. That's one important thing. Setting the tone for sort of an inclusive environment, creating opportunities for debate, respectable debate, and then modeling how to interrogate an idea, not a person. So when you're a person of color on a board, and I won't speak for everyone, but I will say there are times where you have the awkward pause, where people assume you have a position. So I tend to use a little bit of humor. I mean, everyone has a different way that they get there. I tend to assume positive intent until I'm absolutely convinced that it's not. And at that point, I set very strong boundaries. But I assume positive intent. And probably the way that I've seen boards address this best is when curiosity rules. It's amazing when you're curious and you're learning together how many faux pas you can make. How many times you can step in sensitive territory, and that would be uncomfortable for some members on the board. But if everybody's learning together, everybody's willing to say, you know what, I have no idea. And so starting with questions, we used to count the questions at the board meeting. We used to count them in committee. Like, how many times do we ask each other questions? What do you think about this, Kim? Help me understand this. I'm not sure about that. That's very different than declarative statements. It sets a completely different tone. And then everyone can engage. And it brings down that sense of, I've got to be perfect. I've got that imposter theory I'm trying to fight myself against. I'm representing all people of color. Sometimes I will put a joke about that as you'll get a board member that says, oh, you probably know this person. Like, they're tall, they're a former model, runway, and they kind of lighten it. Oh, no, maybe you don't. Like, I don't know, there's like 43 million African Americans. I probably don't know them all, my guess. And so sometimes just lightening it up a bit. But again, I extend as much grace as I know how until I see with signals that a boundary has to be set. And you also have to be very good and quick at setting boundaries. And I've had to do that, unfortunately, many times in my career, setting very strong boundaries about, no, that's actually not what I'm going to represent. I'm not going to be your Sherpa here and help you understand this topic. There's enough content out there. Go do your homework and we'll talk. I will absolutely be here to confirm, deny, provide exception, but I am not going to help you do the work. You got to do your own work.